sun, how are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good, good, good morning. Good, good morning. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good, good, good morning, sun. Good morning, life. Good morning, sun. How are you? Skies above. Gee, it's great to be alive and love. Good morning, sun. Good morning, sun. Good morning.
And greetings. Good coffee to you. So, it has been a while. It is April 15th, which is traditionally tax day in the United States. We have had a postponement of that in the US for obvious reasons. But nonetheless, it is still a day of celebration because I completed 12 months of bank recs and got all my paperwork done to my accountant in 2 days. Cheers to that. Okay, so what are we doing here today? What's going on? That is strange. Let's try that again. Screen. Oh, sorry, I was on the right screen. Too many screens, too many buttons. Okay, so I think I'm in the right place. So if you follow me on Twitter, you may have seen that I went camping, and I try to do this every year with a group of friends. It's kind of my birthday camping trip in March or April. And this year we went to southern Utah to an area south of Zion, basically Zion National Park in southern Utah. And it is quite beautiful, very, very scenic, just amazing buttes and huge cliff walls and rock formations. Really gorgeous, and this time of year it was quite nice. And get quite cold, so we were expecting freezing temperatures, but it turned out to be nearly 90 degrees during the day and say 40 to 50 degrees at night. So it turned out to be nice weather, yeah. So it was a good camping trip. I think I discovered that 7 days of camping is probably my limit. And we're talking what's called dispersed camping. There is no running water, no faucets, no showers, no bathrooms, no toilets. You're in the middle of the desert on your own. You got to bring everything in. You got to take everything out. So you'll see in this photo here, there's a Sprinter van. So my friend did have a Sprinter van. So we had the, 2-minute brief hose off shower outdoors. That was the only luxury we had. And it had a sink, so we were able to wash our dishes. But that was pretty much it. So that was fun. Next up, coffee. As you may know, I am interested in coffee. And I have been trying to figure out where do I buy different types of coffee. The typical grocery stores and, the big box stores only have a limited selection. And oftentimes I found that those coffees on the shelf are, 6 to 8 months old. And they do not rotate much. I have a local smaller grocery store that has some better coffees and better rotation of their stock, but limited selection, right? I can't, they only have maybe 8 different types of coffee I can try, let's say. So I found this website, Go Coffee Go, And I think it may be US only. I think they're based out of San Francisco, and they're basically I don't know what to call it, a collective or sorts that they host the website that allows you to buy from individual coffee roasters throughout the US. I think they're all US. So far, that's all I found. And you submit the order on their website for, say, 5 different types of coffee, and those orders will go to the 5 different roasters, and they roast, say, 2 days a week. And so you will get the fresh roast right from that local roaster in West Virginia or in Seattle or, New Mexico, wherever. And those will be delivered separately. You do have to pay for shipping per roaster, which is like $5, but it's pretty cool. So I'm able to try these first 2 on the far left. Those are what are called washed coffees. And I'd heard of that, but that was new to me. This is the first time I've been able to try washed coffee, and those are pretty good. And so I'm also trying some decafs. It is nearly impossible to find decent decaf coffee at any store. You can buy the ground stuff or the crystals or Folgers or whatever, but very difficult to find like decent small roast decaf coffee. So I'm trying them. Not as good as normal coffee, but sometimes at 4 p.m. I want a cup of coffee and I don't want to stay up all night. So I'm trying several different decaf coffees to see which ones are tolerable. So there you go. If you're into coffee, pretty cool site. It's probably not the cheapest option in the world, but I think their prices are actually cheaper than trying to order direct from the different roasters. And the shipping is probably, the flat fee shipping is also probably cheaper. So I'm enjoying it so far. It's pretty cool. So that was camping and coffee. Next up, we have some Business Central. And you may have heard there was a recent launch event. So 2021 Release Wave 1, I hope I got that right, launch event. And this, I think, is Business Central 18, version 18.x. And the launch event, that is a long link, but it's social27.com is kind of the event hosting provider. And once you register, free registration, there was a keynote and a live Q&A, which was great. I was able to watch that. I have not been able to watch, had not had time to watch any of the 16 on-demand videos yet. So there are 16 different sessions here, pre-recorded. You can watch on demand, and covers all the different categories of new functionality and new features and enhancements and things that are available in Wave 1. And there are several things that are in here that are not were not published in the original 2021 Wave 1 PDF. So there's like a 500 some PDF of all of the Dynamics 365 and Power Platform enhancements. That listed some of the enhancements, but there are some new announcements that came at this event and are discussed in these sessions, including a lot more details about some of the enhancements. And one of the big ones, which everyone is talking about, was storage. Business Central Storage, you probably, the SaaS, this is all SaaS. SaaS storage, there were a lot of grumbling about the 80 gigabyte limit, and that's per tenant. So if you have 10 companies, you could potentially hit that 80 gigabyte capacity sooner. And so there are a lot of concerns that larger customers would have issues. Well, Microsoft heard those concerns and they ran the numbers, looked at actual customers and weighed their cost of storage, presumably. And rather than having the base entitlement of 80 gigs plus $40, I guess, per additional gigabyte, which would add up pretty quickly because these are monthly fees, I believe. Additional 100 gigabyte was $4,000. If that was a month, that's a chunk of change. And they've restructured it. And so there is still the 80 gigabyte base entitlement, but there is now an additional 2 gigabytes per user with Essentials or 3 gigabytes per user with Premium. So if my understanding is if you had you had 10 users in Essentials, you would have an additional 20 gigabyte allocation for a total of 100 gigabytes, if I'm not mistaken, with a 10 user Essentials license. You can buy additional gigabytes at $10 per gigabyte, and the additional 100 gigabytes price was decreased dramatically to $500. So much more flexible and accommodating pricing, it seems. So that sounded great. But a very astute, I think it might have been Christoph on Twitter, said, well, what about our 40 gigabyte blob and media allocation that was on top of the 80 gigabytes? And there is a footnote, which I didn't notice. Storage is inclusive of all BC Online customer data, including relational and blob, both in current and new storage plans. So the 40 gigabyte separate allocation for the media or blob is apparently no longer going to be present. And this 80 gigabyte plus 2 gigabytes per user is all inclusive. So if you're doing file attachments, blobs, whatever that may entail, that's it. That is your allocation. So if you have the 10 users at Essentials, that would be 20 gigabytes, 100 gigabytes total. So it scales. So if you had 50 users, you're going to get quite a bit more storage, but that is inclusive of the blobs or media. So anyway, that was a big talking point from the keynote that was discussed, and I'm sure there are more details in the on-demand sessions. So I'm going to have to allocate like all weekend to get through these. I don't know when I'm going to get through this. I didn't have a chance to watch all of the last ones, so I know there is important information in these, so I need to watch them. It's just a matter of time. I think we're having virtual event overload at this point. So, okay. Next up, my good buddy Tanya sent me a note about this feature. And for context, Tanya and I are from the GP world, if you don't know. And so we're learning lots of nooks and crannies of Business Central. And there are lots, there are hundreds of features that we're just learning and figuring out. And one of those she sent me is security filters. And I don't believe we had anything equivalent to this remotely. I could be wrong, but I don't think we had anything equivalent to this in the Dynamics GP world. So we find this stuff interesting. It's like, how could we use this? Should we use this? Why would we use this? And what are the implications or complications of using this? And so this is record level security in Business Central, where you can add filters to limit a user's access to data in a table. So some of the examples are, let's say that you only want this user to see records related to one or more customers. You do not want them to have access to all customers or all transactions for all customers. Let's say they get access to the North American customers and any transactions for those North American customers. If it's, say, a European customer or European order, this user would not have access to that. That's my understanding of how this works. So it sounds like this is pretty configurable. I need to see how this is implemented. And it sounds like you can implement at the customer level. I'm thinking that might be kind of tedious to manage. Maybe there's a customer group or a customer type, more of a category you can apply this to. One of the examples I think referenced a salesperson. So anything related to that salesperson. So I think this likely requires some design and some significant thought to make sure you're implementing this in a very maintainable way, shall we say. And my question then is, okay, well, let's say you do this. How easy is it to troubleshoot things where a user says, well, I can't see this customer, this order, or this transaction, or this detail because it's not within the scope of their security filter? Does that start to get tricky to troubleshoot? Like, how do you know that you're not seeing something, and how do you know that that is due to a security filter? Is there some indication? So I haven't actually tried it yet, but it sounds interesting. I'd like to check it out, and maybe Tanya and I will do a live stream where we explore that and see how it works. So thought that was a cool feature. I don't know if I have any customers who would have used this over the years, like GP customers. Often you'll see these features and a customer will say, ooh, that's neat. But when it comes to actually implementing it, it's like, well, do we really need that? I don't know. What are the use cases? I'm sure there are. I don't know how common it is in the space that I work with my customers. Okay, next topic. A popular, right, important topic for me, acceptance test driven development, ATDD. And this here is Luke Van Vuet's book on the topic, automated testing in Dynamics 365 Business Central. And I believe he is working on a new edition. So I don't know if you want to rush out and buy it now or wait for the new edition, but excellent book. And one of the components of ATDD is specification by example or user story or scenario. There are a couple different names for this, but there's a template that is used where you have a scenario or user story or feature, and then for that test, to test that, you use a nomenclature or lingo of given, when, then. Those are the components of that story. And you define the feature, like in this example, complete scenario. Feature, lookup value, customer. Scenario, assign lookup value to customer. Given a lookup value, which is part of the demo that is discussed in the book, and given a customer, set up lookup value to customer, which I think assign this lookup value to a customer. It's a custom field. And then customer has lookup value code field populated in your table extension or custom table. And so this example is like a field level. So we have a custom field on a customer. We're assigning a value to it. And when we assign it, then we go perform a test to check that that field is populated in a table. Kind of a narrow scope atomic test that you'll perform with ATDD. So I thought, okay, the problem that I encounter and I've had myself is when I develop code as the developer, I have, call it cognitive blindness for what to test for. I will say, okay, I added these 5 features, so I need to test for A, B, C, and D. And I will often think of routine tests. And I can have validation on the UI or in the data or whatever. I'll hand it to the customer invariably, right away. The customer will find something that is not included in my test, whether that's a UI, a process, clicking on something randomly, or bad data or data that was not anticipated, say if you're importing data. So users and data seem to have a way of coming up with scenarios that I could not possibly think of in advance when writing these tests. So I thought, okay, how can I expand this discussion to my development team, my functional team, so it's not just me or my developer writing tests. I don't think that's a good solution, having your developer be the one who writes the test. I think I want to push this out to the functional side and the sales side and the people who are interacting with the customers. And I thought, okay, how can we do this? So I thought, well, what if I just create a Word template that uses this convention, given, when, then, or scenario given, when, then. So my feature, and I was trying, like, what is something that is non-technical? And this is probably not a great example, but I tried to see if I could use this as an example. So let's say I want to have cereal for breakfast. I want to enjoy a bowl of cold cereal in the morning. Given I need a bowl, given I need a spoon, given I need cereal, given I need cold milk. You could have warm milk, I guess, but I want to be clear that it's cold milk. When the cereal is poured in the bowl, when the milk is poured in the bowl, when I put the spoon of cereal into my mouth, then I can eat it. It's a silly example, but I'm trying to just work through the process and like, how does this work? If we use a BC example, a very, very generic example is, let's say I want to default a customer number when I create a new customer. So allow the user to specify a number series to be used for new customers. And this doesn't even get into defaulting the value. This apparently is just specifying a number series. Given that we have a sales and receivables setup page in Business Central, and given that we have a valid number series set up, and these would normally be, the receivables setup page would be set up already, but our test would create a new valid number series. When a number series is entered on the receivables setup page, then we should be able to test that the number series is saved in the receivables setup table. I think that's a test. So anyway, I have questions for Luke. So I'm hoping we're looking to do a live stream to discuss this and kind of discuss not the specifics and the mechanics of ATDD and implementing automated testing, but more just stepping back. What is a business process? What's an overall development team and application lifecycle process for incorporating this into development? And so these are basic examples, but some of the things that come to mind shortly after doing this stuff is, okay, let's say I create a sample test scenario where I create a transaction. Let's say it's a sales order or an invoice. Fine. So I created this transaction. I created a test. It tests fine. And then we realize, oh, well, my context is a US customer. I just made that assumption, right? That's what a developer would do. Oh, simple setup, simple customer, simple line items, done. It worked. My test passed. Let's say we get a customer in Canada using the software. They go to create a new transaction and they get an error because Canada is different. Maybe it's the different address format. Maybe it's different VAT or tax scenario. Maybe there's something different about a Canadian transaction than a US transaction. Okay. Well, if Canada has to have a different test, what about Mexico? What about UK, Belgium, Singapore, Spain? The list goes on and on. Do I need to consider different tests for different countries? Do I need to have different test scenarios for different currencies, languages, taxes, or VAT? My question is, how many permutations do I need to consider for these types of fundamental differences in potential transactions? And let's say I create a transaction with one line item and it passes and I say, oh, great, I'm done. Well, you may know that one line item in the programming world is different than 5 line items, which can be different than 100 line items. So how many tests do you do to test those scenarios with line items? And then there is a specific test of having the same item number on multiple lines. That has completely different logic in the application that can bring forth different bugs and issues. So I would want to test for one line item, multiple line items, and multiple line items with the same item number. Well, what if a user enters an invalid date like ABCD? What does Business Central do? What does our code do? What if they enter a date that's 2 years old? What if they enter a date that's 2 years in the future? Should that result in an error, a warning, nothing? Is that acceptable? And this may not trigger, say, a hard application error, but maybe we need to think about business logic that prompts a warning or does something. Then you have zeros, you have negatives, you have blank fields, and those are just kind of field level, more granular tests. What if you have a process? What if it involves creating transactions, posting them, printing something, subsequent processing, pushing out an email? Maybe you need to have those transactions show up on an aging and have subsequent workflow that kicks off from there. How do you have a automated testing that incorporates a really long multi-step business process? So is that appropriate for ATDD? How do you deal with that? And I just don't have answers. There may be obvious answers. I just don't know what those are yet. So what I've typically done over the years is I set up a framework for, typically in my case, for the applications I developed for validation. It wasn't automated testing, but I would release, say, an integration, and it would process data and import it. And I would start simple with validations. I would say, is there a customer present in this field, a customer ID? Or is there a vendor ID? Or is the GL account valid? Is the amount valid? And I would just have a few basic tests. And I learned that there isn't much value for me writing a whole bunch of elaborate tests up front, because as I mentioned, invariably the customer or the data will produce situations that I would have never thought of that. So I'll do basic tests to get my framework set up, and then I'll release it in the wild, have someone test it, come up with the real world problems that occur, and then I go back and have to code tests against that, whether those are tests or validation or whatever. So my preferred practice based on my experience is start simple. Don't create 100 tests before your beta test. Just create a few, get your framework set up for how you're going to test, release it, do your beta testing, let customers bang against it, break it, and then collect information about the actual errors that are occurring. And then you can write real world tests that seem to work. And that seems to be better and more efficient use of my time. And then the other other question is, okay, so let's say I need to test for US and Mexico and Canada and Belgium and Singapore in different scenarios. Let's say I need to create an invoice with 1 line item, 10 line items, 5 line items, 0 line items, and test those different scenarios. Well, I don't think it makes sense to write code, separate procedures for every single one of those scenarios. I would think that I could have a procedure, create invoice, and it has parameters, what type of customer, what country, what language, how many line items, VAT, no VAT, taxes, no tax, what type of errors do you want to test, so that it's parameterized and it's contained in one logic block. I don't know if that's valid or good practice or a bad practice. The thing is, let's say we create 20 different procedures for 20 different invoice tests. Well, if something changes, I don't want to have to update 20 different procedures just to create an invoice. I'd ideally like to have one create invoice procedure that accepts 5 parameters and handles those scenarios, so that I only have to update one place in my code should say Business Central invoice creation change. So those are just the questions that I have about testing. It's like granular, getting the team involved, writing the narratives, and then how do you deal with these permutations, and then how do you scale that to multiple scenarios and longer workflow processes. So I have questions. I do not have answers yet. So I'm hoping to speak with Luke to just ask these questions and learn from him and see what some of the best practices are. And so with that, I hope you're having a good week and enjoy the Business Central launch event on-demand sessions. They will fill a weekend, so get comfortable, pull up a screen, and check out the new features. Have a good one.
Good morning, sun. How are